directly given to Ezekiel by God. It was from God himself. It was not a case where Ezekiel had read a book or a transcript, but he was hearing from God directly. So what we see here then is that God is speaking, and by extension, Ezekiel is saying what God is saying. And because of how the story was presented, if we in today's time should think of bringing the story into a movie form or a play or a drama, and we think of a family setting, one of the disclaimer or the captions that we would see is that there would be advisory, because some of these movies are considered explicit. The language or the scenes that are presented are really for mature audience. So you'll see parental discretion is advised. In other words, when you're at a certain age, there's some things that you're not supposed to be reading or listening or even watching. Some of them are rated R. Parental discretion is advised. So it says like the following program has contents that are intended for mature audiences only. And these are some of the things that we hear. And believe me, I think this chapter could be in any of those categories. Because after going back through and sort of fine-tuning, I recognize that the language that God used, he was not mincing words. He was bringing Jerusalem to face, as it were, so that she could understand her abomination. She had taken it to another level. And having done that, it makes it really, really sad. And so in those early verses, that's what he spoke about. Now, the children that were born were God's children. But Jerusalem, Israel, the nation, as it is, have left them up and have allowed them to have gone astray and having seen the worst of behavior. Can you imagine children that were born in holy matrimony? The mother has now gotten out of control and is now roaming the streets. Not only that, but her children are now exposed to things, materials, and allowed to see things that they had no right to be seeing. And this is where Jerusalem have placed her children. But God has stepped in and say, listen, they're not just yours, but they are mine. You see, in a domestic dispute, when the relationship has reached a stage where it is considered irreconcilable differences, there is a battle for the custody of the children. And here we are now seeing, because let's not forget that when Jerusalem was in her own blood, and if we go back and look at verse 7, I think, let me read it. He said, I have caused thee to multiply as the bud of the field, and has increased and waxen great, and thou art come to excellent ornaments. Thy breasts are fashioned, and thine hair is grown, whereas thou wast naked and bare. In other words, when she had gone through all of that, immediately after the attentiveness that God had shown, he now claimed her as his own. Verse 8 says, now when I passed by thee and looked upon thee, behold, thy time was a time of love, and I spread my skirt over thee and covered thy nakedness. Yea, I swear unto thee and entered into a covenant. I entered into a covenant. So this is not something that you will take the credit and say, well, I did it all by myself. God is saying, we have a covenant. This is a covenant relationship. I have entered into a covenant with thee, said the Lord God, and thou becamest mine. I also looked at Isaiah chapter 54. And before we go there, let's look at verse 32. Verse 32 said, but as a wife that committed adultery, which taketh strangers instead of her husband. Very, very clear. They give gifts to whores, but thou givest thy gifts to all thy lovers, and hirest them that they may come unto thee on every side by thy whoredoms. So the children that were born was not just for her, but they belong to God. And so God is taking her into account for this kind of lewd behavior. And let us jump a little further. In verse 38, let's find it. It says, and I will judge thee as women that break wedlock and shed blood are judged, and I will give thee blood in fury and jealousy. In other words, I'm going to do what women who break their wedding vows get when they walk out. In other words, the woman that was caught in adultery, what did they plan to do to her? They planned to stone her to death. They planned to kill her. In other words, the piles of stone were on standby because that's what they normally do. And so here it is then, that because this was the situation, God is saying, you have messed up my children. Their future is bleak. Their future has been affected. They have a psychological trauma. They are experiencing brokenness because of your behavior. And so then we must understand that our children are not really ours, but they're God's. When they've been given to us, it is just for a limited time. So we have to be careful how we raise our children. We don't just raise them any and anyhow and do anything as we please, but we raise them, we grow them up in the fear and the admonition of the Lord. That is our responsibility, because understand, they're not going to be there for long. They're not going to be there for long. They are going to be there for a very limited time. And so as parents, as people who are responsible, we must understand that this cannot be discounted. We must grow our children right. We must coach them right. When they have come to maturity, they make decisions for themselves. But as we grow them up, let's do that right. It means then we have the responsibility. The church is the very same. We cannot just treat the things of God lightly. And when things need to be corrected or discipline need to be exercised, we let everything slide. But we need to coach, we need to nurture, we need to guide so that the church will be presented as a glorious church without spot or wrinkle. So here it is then. Let's move on. In the verse that we read, verse 38, that's where we started tonight. Let me get there quickly. So he says, and I will judge thee as women that break wedlock and shed blood are judged. And I will give thee blood in fury and jealousy. God he's expressing exactly what he's going to do. Because the woman that he had taken to be his wife has broken the marriage vow, the covenant, the relationship, and she has gone to the streets. She's now gone a whoring, as the scripture says. But hear what he says further in the chapter. Let me find the verse. And I will also give thee into their hands, and they shall throw down thine eminent place, and I will break down thy high places. They shall strip thee also of thy clothes, and shall take thy fair jewels, and leave thee naked and bare. Now, when there's a sense of stripping and nakedness, if you recall, that's how God found Jerusalem. When he found her, she was naked. She was in an open field. But let's look at it in the literal sense. When a child or a baby, an infant, is naked, there's no shame. No. There's nothing to hide. But now that she has grown and she has matured, she's now in a state of adulthood, where she's now a woman, because the earlier verses said her breasts were grown. She has grown hair, and that spoke something very explicit. Understand, it is speaking about additional hair that is not hair that is grown or seen when a child or a baby is born. And so she has developed to the point where he has now taken her as his wife. But hear what is going to happen in these verses. She is going to be stripped naked. In other words, her nakedness will be seen by all. And that's where it is going to end up. They shall also bring up a company against thee, and they shall stone thee with stones, and thrust thee through with swords. And they shall turn thine house with fire, burn thine house with fire, and execute judgment upon thee in the sight of many women. And I will cause thee to cease from playing the harlot, and thou also shall give no hire anymore. In other words, you have done enough, so I will make my fury toward thee to rest. In other words, God is saying, I'm boiling with anger, and I'm not going to let it go. I have to get it out. You have to feel the punishment. That's exactly what he's saying. And I will be quiet after all that is done, and will be no more angry. My anger is going to be displayed in the behavior, because thou hast not remembered the days of thy youth. The youth keeps being rehearsed or coming back.
And that's where I took you from.
Because that's where I have brought you from. Do not forget where you're coming from. Israel somehow ignored their history. They ignored where they were born, the condition that they were in. But God said, look, this is so important to me. And every time I remember where I brought you from, it makes me even more angry. Behold, everyone that useth the proverb shall use this proverb against thee. It's going to be derogatory. And they're going to be saying, give me a second, my verse just slipped.
44.
Yes, let me just find it here. Behold, everyone that useth proverbs shall use this proverb against thee, saying, as is the mother, so is her daughter. Thou art thy mother's daughter, that loatheth or hated her husband and her children, and thou art the sister of thy sisters, which hated their husband and their children. Your mother was a Hittite, and your father an Amorite. In other words, God is spilling his guts. God is saying exactly how he is feeling deep down on the inside. And you're talking about a jealous God here. This is not a God who is just loving under the quiet. He has spoken out loudly. I am a jealous God. And thine elder sister is Samaria. She and her daughters that dwell at thy left hand, and thy younger sister that dwelleth at thy right hand is Sodom and her daughters. Let's stop here a little bit and get some clarity or understanding. All these names that have been mentioned, they're referring let me look at it in another sense. It is not a sister mother-father relationship, so to speak. It's not literal, but it is figuratively or parabolically speaking, because this is being used as a parable so that Israel would understand where they fall. So Sodom being one city, Samaria being another city, and it also spoke of the other cities that are involved. But here the picture is showing us that these cities are within the same region where Jerusalem is. Because they're neighbors. They are all a part and parcel of the land of Canaan or Palestine. So God is using them in a family setting to say then that they are your sisters. You are related. But the story that we see following here is that God is using them as his reference to show the depravity to which Jerusalem have sunken, where she has found herself. She had, in her days of being righteous, conveniently, I'm using this, in her days of good relationship with God, in the days when both her and her husband were in love, in the days when there was no one to her like her husband, she did not count any of those sisters. She did not even call their name. She made no reference of them. Why? Because they were heathenistic. They were practicing idolatry. And she saw herself as such an exclusive wife that who me talk to those people, I would never mix up myself with those people. In other words, her level of commitment was such a high level. Yeah. It's like the queen of the region. But somehow, I don't know where it happened, what it is that got into her head. The Bible said that she got beside herself. She looked at herself and saw beauty. The kind of food that she ate, the clothes that she wore, her ointment, the jewelry. Her husband took great care of her. She was lacking nothing. What is it that could have caused her to have walked out of the marriage? What? What is it that God should have done that he didn't do? What made her behave the way she behaved? It is something really to take into consideration. Sometimes, brothers and sisters, comfort, satisfaction bring us to places. We start rubbing shoulder to shoulder with certain elite, with different people. They call them the higher echelon of society. Those who consider themselves as being successful. They have all these kind of places that they go. And before you know it, your values are not the same anymore. Your husband is not the same anymore. Your wife is not the same anymore. And you start looking other places. You start behaving like those people. They said the Joneses. And it causes us then to feel as if, well, he's not meeting my needs or she is not meeting my needs. But please note in this text how God laid out his case. Man, if this was a courtroom, there's no way Jerusalem would get off the hook. They can't get away because God had all his facts lined up. He lined them up. He showed how he gave her the best food, the best clothes, the best footwear. She lived in places where nobody else could have lived. But she was still not satisfied. Can I say, brothers and sisters, that some of the things that people crave for, it is in detriment of their relationship with God. They go out of the way to achieve. And all it is just for fame and fortune. And it's just satisfaction for the moment. But after that is over, you lose your family, you lose your salvation, you lose your belongings, and you lose everything. You lose your faith. You lose your faith. And so here it is then. This is where Jerusalem had found herself. And so verse 46 said, and thine eldest sister is Samaria, and her daughters that dwell at the left hand, and the younger sister that dwelleth on the right hand is Sodom and her daughters. Yet hast thou not walked after their ways. This is a clincher now. Nor done after their abominations. But as if that were a very little thing. In other words, them don't know how to sin. Let me show them. That's how Jerusalem was doing it. All right. now that I have broken out of the fence, I have broken out of control. As I live, saith the Lord God, Sodom, thy sister. Hear this. This is a strong argument. Sodom, thy sister, hath not done, she nor her daughters, as thou hast done. Thou and thy daughters, behold, this was the iniquity of thy sister Sodom. Right. So Sodom was prideful. She had abundance of food, but never gave meal or a free meal to anyone. She never had that generosity. And she was in herself, just full of herself. She was haughty, riding high. Neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and needy. Verse 50 says, and they were haughty and committed abomination before me. Therefore, I took them away as I saw good. Neither had Samaria committed half of thy sins, but thou hast multiplied thine abomination more than they, and hast justified thy sister in all thine abomination which thou hast done. Wow, we have to stop here a little bit. So you're talking about Sodom. You're talking about Samaria. These people, as it is, we could put them on the blacklist. But what they did seemed small to what Jerusalem has done and continues to do while this prophecy was being made known. So here he's saying they have not done half. But can you look at the descriptive adjectives? Let me find it. It says, but thou hast multiplied thine abominations more than they. Now, it's not adding, brothers and sisters. We're talking about multiplication here. Double up, triple up, quadrupled up. In other words, Jerusalem, that pretty young girl, young woman that's grown up, gave birth to beautiful children, has broken out and has gone wild. And she is now multiplying her abomination. But the part of the verse that really spoke volume, it says, but thou hast multiplied thine abominations more than they, and hast justified thy sister in all thine abomination which thou hast done. In other words, when one is justified, the Bible said that we have been declared righteous. Is that correct? Being justified by faith, we have peace with God. Because of the abomination and the level of Jerusalem's sin, she has declared Sodom and Samaria as righteous people. Let that soak a little bit. As it is, she is saying, I will show you how to sin. I will show you how it's done. I said, oh, some people will look and say, oh, me a Christian. Me a Christian to them, the kind of behavior. I am a child of God when I compare the behavior of some people. That's what sinners do say. I am a Christian. Well, this is what is being said of Jerusalem. Samaria and Sodom are now in a state of claiming righteousness because of Jerusalem's raucous behavior.
The word.
My God.
Church,
my God. Thou also which has judged thy sisters, bear thine own shame for thy sins that thou hast committed, more abominable than they. They are more righteous than thou. Yea, be thou confounded also, and bear thy shame in that thou hast justified thy sisters. We have put them in a category where righteousness seemed like an overreach. When I shall bring again their captivity, the captivity of Sodom and her daughters, and the captivity of Samaria and her daughters, then will I bring again the captivity of thy captives in the midst of them. Let's stop here a little bit. Don't forget, brothers and sisters, that based on where we are at in the scriptures, Sodom was judged because of her abomination. Samaria was judged because of her abominations. Now, God could not have allowed his wife, Jerusalem, to get off because he has destroyed cities for less than that. Are you with me? Amen. In other words, God could not go soft. I heard a preacher preach one time, said God will have to beg some cities pardon if he doesn't judge certain sins. He's not going to do that. And he's not going to do that. So Sodom and Gomorrah, they have already been destroyed. They have paid the price. So what do you think about what God is saying? He's not going to let go. There is a price to be paid. Sodom and her daughters shall return to their former estate, and Samaria and her daughters shall return to their former estate. And thou and thy daughters shall return to your former estate. Let's run down. For thy sister Sodom was not mentioned by thy mouth in the days of thy pride. You never count them. They never come into your focus, your zone. They weren't invited to your place of gathering. But thy wickedness was discovered as at the time of thy reproach of the daughters of Syria, and all that are round about her, the daughters of the Philistines, which despise thee round about. Thou hast borne thy lewdness and thine abomination, saith the Lord. For thus saith the Lord God, I will even deal with thee as thou hast done, which has despised the oath in breaking the covenant. God is not going to let go that point. He's repeating it. It has become a repetition. It is so important. Remember your covenant. When the letter was written to the church, the 7 churches, I think it was a church at Ephesus. You have a name. And that's all you're living off. Was, but not anymore. It's important then that we understand that whatever the covenant holds, or whatever are the important points that have been brought out in the covenant, there are rules, there are guidelines, there are do's and don'ts. I will establish unto thee an everlasting covenant. In other words, the one that I had already established is broken. It had been shattered. But after I have brought you to the knees, I'm going to expose you. I'm going to let the world see your shame. They are going to see you and you're going to be embarrassed. But I will do something after that. I'm going to now establish a new covenant. Then shalt thou remember thy ways, and be ashamed when thou shalt receive thy sister, thine elder and thy younger, and I will give them unto thee for daughters, but not by thy covenant. In other words, this sounds like something that will be fulfilled in the millennial age.
Yes.
And I will establish my covenant with thee, and thou shalt know that I am the Lord, that thou mayst remember and be confounded, and never open thy mouth anymore because of thy shame. In other words, you're going to stop the bragging. You're not going to be braggadocious. You're going to take the seat of humility when I am pacified toward thee for all that thou hast done, saith the Lord. In other words, God does not need anyone to say, okay, God, you've said enough. We get the message. God is going to know when it is enough. Don't tell me to shut up. Don't tell me to hold my peace. All right, God, that's enough. No, I have enough to say, and I'm going to say it to the full. And that's why he is helping us to understand tonight that we cannot disobey him and not pay the penalty. And so when he judges sin, he judges it according to the covenant relationship that he has with us. And so then we don't need to be becoming a byword. People don't need to be looking at us and laughing, making mockery, because we understand the relationship, what it entails. We understand that sin must be dealt with. We understand that the blessings that God has blessed us with are not merely just to be living lavish lifestyle, but it is to enhance and to advance his kingdom. Israel, Jerusalem, is now in a spot of bother because the things that God gave her, she lavished them on her lovers. In other words, she behaved as a rich prostitute. She behaved like one who don't need no money. And when we look in the text and see how the Bible tells us, and we didn't go in that portion tonight, but it tells us that Jerusalem built lavish places that were on every prominent corner where she set up herself. She built places where she could hang out with her lovers. In other words, these were high places or places that she could carry out her adulterous behavior. But God said, I'm going to destroy them. I'm going to tear them down. How did she get all the financing for all of this? It came from God. They were God's blessings. And so when God blesses us, he's not blessing us for us to go distance from him, to bring in other gods. In other words, he's saying, I am your husband. The bedroom or the place that you have built to accommodate these other men, these idols, they make me jealous. That is supposed to be mine. That's where I should have been meeting with you. Don't forget that when a man and a woman gets married, the special place that they meet is in a place of holy matrimony. So when Jerusalem built these special locations, they were built so that she could meet her idols there, her men, in other words, her lovers. And you see, these are the descriptions that we're using so we can all get the message, because they have taken the place of God. God was the only one that should have been in that bedroom, not another idol or another God, but this true and living God. He belongs there. He's the one that she was exposed to. He is the one that married her. He is the one that claims her to be his wife. How is it then that other men are being brought in? They are being brought in because she has become wanton. She has become lustful. She has too much material on her hand. In other words, she's not living from hand to mouth. Her disposable income basically is so much that she don't take payment from the men that she sleeps with. She pays them. She said, come, I'll pay you. Come on, don't be shy. I'll pay you. Other women does that for money. But she says, don't worry, I'll cover the cost and I'll give you a tip. Here it is then, brothers and sisters. We serve a jealous God, and we ought to be careful. The church, therefore, and we're going to bring this home to the church. The church, therefore, has a responsibility to keep out everything that could become a god. Everything that could become an idol. Whatever we find that we are paying more attention to, taking the place of the God that we serve, we are basically setting ourselves up for a fall. And just like how Jerusalem had played the harlot, she was wild, she was out of control. And it was not because she did not have material. It was not because she had needs, but she had lustful eyes. She sought after things that she perceived were better than what she had. Someone said the grass is always greener on the other side. But I heard someone says, but don't forget, it could be sitting on a pit, on a septic pit. Understand, therefore, that the God that we serve, brothers and sisters, he's jealous. He is jealous. And what does a man do, or a husband do, or a woman do who is jealous? If you marry someone and they're not jealous, then they don't really care about you. Because if God can say, look, I am jealous, is to tell us that, look, don't play with our relationship. I am a jealous God. And what jealous people do? They will hurt you. They will destroy you. The children that the relationship has born, make sure that they're not being used as a weapon against your spouse. We must understand then that this God sees his church as his own. His bride. His bride. And when he comes back, he's coming back for a church without spot or wrinkle. So we cannot afford to be dabbling, to be running up and down, to be picking here and picking there. We can't afford to be taking advice from all kind of people who don't even know how to keep their own relationship together. Sometimes we're seeking advice from people, all they will know to do is tell you how to get a separation or a divorce. They're telling you how it is done. It is advertised on the streets, $99 for a divorce. No, we're in it for good. We're in it to stay. God said, I brought you to light. Nobody knew you when you were in the field. I am the one. And don't let me have to take you out. He's warning the church tonight. It is not only for Israel, because their time has come. And please understand that this prophecy was before Jerusalem was finally destroyed. And understand that God is jealous. The church is his. It is not for other gods. Let us not bring other gods in the picture. Let us not be caught up with the flares and the glamours and the glitz. The church has lost its focus in many respects. But we are belonging to that jealous bridegroom. And as we prepare ourselves for his return, let us understand that jealousy is his name. I am a jealous God. As we close tonight, let us leave here with an understanding and ask ourselves the question, am I doing anything that is endangering the relationship between me and my God? Am I making him angry? Am I making him mad? Does he feel neglected? May the Lord bless us tonight as we think on these. And if we find ourselves in a spot where we know we have not been faithful, we have not been true, he's bringing us to